Hey everybody, I'm here today to share with you how you can create some really fun texture with your alcohol-based markers. I'm going to be using the brand new fishing stamp set. It's from Two Paper Divas. They just released it this month in May, and it is quickly becoming one of my favorites. I love the sentiments in this set, and it is just a really great masculine set. The sentiments cover about any occasion or holiday you're going to need a masculine card for. So this stamp set has you covered when it comes to your men in your life. There's a look at that stamp set, and you can see the sentiments read, "You can tackle anything," "I am hooked on you," and also "Happy birthday to a really cool guy." Really spelled R-E-E-L-Y to make it a very fun, punny sentiment. Here I'm going to go ahead and just lay out my scene, and I've noticed that I've never really showed you how I actually come up with my scenes that I make quite often. I really love to mask. It's one of my favorite techniques, if you couldn't tell. So here what I'm doing is I'm just laying my stamps out, the real stamps, onto the paper. And I'm just kind of getting them how I want them. You can tell my hat's in the very front, so that is the stamp I'm going to stamp first. So I left that on my paper, and I'm just going to close the door to my Misty and pick up that stamp. Now I am using my Misty today, but you do not have to. I'm just making it a little bit easier on myself in case I misstamp. I didn't end up misstamping at all, but this is just kind of those just in case tools that I use a lot. There is that Inkadinkadoo masking paper that I use all the time. It comes with 12 sheets in it. It's not very expensive at all. It is linked below if you want to check it out. And I mask a lot, and I have masking sets that I have cut out to all of my stamp sets that I have, and you can see that this comes with 12 sheets like I've said, and I've still got about 6 left, a little under 6. So these last quite a long time. All I do is stamp that down and then trim it out with some fine detail scissors, peel that blue backing paper off, and then I use my tweezers to put this down. The less you touch with your fingers on the back of this, the longer your masks are going to last. The oil on your fingers tends to make them a little bit less sticky. So I try to use my tweezers as much as possible, and it also really cuts down on smearing. Sometimes it seems like that ink doesn't want to dry on the masking paper, and also if I've stamped recently and the new stamp got onto that mask, then I'll pick that up and I'll smear it, and it's just, your tweezers are your best tool to use when placing these. So my next stamp in line is my little tackle box there, and I want my hat to look like it's kind of leaning up against that tackle box, so I'm going to just kind of cut off the corner of it. I've lined my paper up there. It shifted just a little bit on me, so I'm just going to line that back up and make sure it's in the right position. And then I'll go ahead and ink this up, and I am using Memento ink because I am going to be coloring with my brand new Dick Blick Studio brush markers. I am loving these alcohol markers. They're just really a lot of fun to play around with and stamp, color in your stamped images with. So that's what I will be doing today. So I'm stamping that down, and I didn't need to double stamp this either, but I'm going to go ahead and just put my mask on top of this. I've already created one for my tackle box also. And then next is going to be my fishing pole, and I want my fishing pole to look like it's standing up. I'm going to end up putting sand down onto my paper, so I want it to look like it's kind of shoved in the sand and standing up in there. So I went ahead and placed that behind, it's going to look like it's behind the tackle box. So I put it just to where it's slightly overlapping that, and the tackle box will kind of cut off a little bit of the fishing pole just to give the illusion that the fishing pole is behind it. So I closed my lid to my Misty and picked up that stamp and just inked up that stamp again, and then I will stamp that right down, and that completes the scene portion. So now what I get to do is the fun part. I get to remove all the mask and see the magic that happens. Again, I use my tweezers just to keep the smearage and also so my masks last a little bit longer. There you can see that fishing pole now looks like it is behind that tackle box. And it also, once I pull this one off, you're going to see that my hat looks like it is leaning up against that tackle box and it's kind of holding it up. And then I just put my masks right on the back of my stamp set so I don't lose them, and it keeps the back nice and free from lint and embossing powders and glitter and all that great stuff that always ends up on my desk. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and draw in a beach scene onto my little panel here, and I'm using a micron pen to draw these in. And first I'm just going to go in and I'm going to touch up a little bit of my stamping here. There were just a few little lines that didn't stamp all the way. And how I choose my micron pens, I have a set of different tips. These come in different size tips, and I just test them out on a piece of scratch paper, and then whichever tip aligns or looks right with the width of the lines on the stamp set is the one I go with. The stamp set I used today has really thin lineage in it, so I went ahead and used a 0.01 micron pen, and I'm just using this Landscape Trio die. This is one of their hill borders in the die set from Mama Elephant. And I'm just using that as a little bit of a stencil to draw in a nice little beach there. And then I brought in just a scallop die also, and I'm going to create some waves with that just by, again, using it as a stencil. So another way to get a little bit more use out of your dies. Now, I went ahead and like I said before, I used my micron pen. I didn't have any trouble with it bleeding with my alcohol markers. I threw away my packaging. I don't know if these are supposed to be used with alcohol markers or not. I didn't have any trouble bleeding, but you might want to test it out with yours. You might have a little bit of problem with them. I'm not really sure if, these are intended for this use. So I'm going to go ahead and start coloring, and first I'm just going to get all my little items there that are on the beach colored in and get them blended out. I'm starting off with that hat, and I wanted to keep it pretty light and a camel colored kind of khaki hat, and then I'm just coloring in all the little bits and pieces on it. Now these Dick Blick markers, like I said, are new. I recently did a review on them, and I will link that if you want to go ahead and check that out. They have pros and cons. Right now I'm loving them. We'll see if I feel that way in a few months though, right? But one thing that I did notice with these markers is there was no swatch sheet, and I need to see these colors to be able to match them up to create blending groups, because the number system is all over the place on this. I really cannot figure it out. So I created a swatch sheet for this, and that is for free over on my blog if you want to head over there and check that out. So I got all my little images colored in there, and now I'm just taking that same micron pen, it's a 0.01, and I am just going to create some little lines with it. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to make it look like these items have really been placed in the sand and they're sitting down in sand. If you place an item in sand, it kind of pushes the sand out from around it and creates little hills on the side of it, I guess you could say, and little divots where it is laying. So I'm just kind of trying to mimic that with some lines, and anywhere that the stamps will touch where they sit on the beach, I'm just creating some little lines and curves here and there, again just to create the illusion that they're really sitting on the beach. And you don't have to be perfect with this. You could always skip this set too and just use some shadows if you want, but I wanted to just go for it and try it out, and I'm actually happy I did. So now that I'm finished with that, I'm going to go ahead and start on coloring in this sand. Now I'm first putting down, it's kind of a medium base layer. It's not my lightest color, it's not my darkest color, it's kind of the second to lightest. So I'm going to go ahead and fill all this in just with a nice even coat. I'm not worried about streaking or anything right now, just getting some color down and getting the paper wet with the ink from the markers. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come in with a darker shade, and I am just going to put a little bit of shadow right where I drew all those lines. This is just a shade darker, and I'm just again kind of coloring over those lines to create some shadow. And then I'll just come in with that color I used to put my first base coat down and just blend that out. Not completely, because I do want some definition where those shadows would be, but just a touch, just to get it blending just a bit. And I also went ahead and came in with a second coat up on the top there to create a little bit of shadow also. Now I'm going to come in with a darker marker, and I'm just going to use that tip to create some dots. You don't want these symmetrical, you don't want them all the same size, you want some big, you want some small, you want some closer together, some further apart. It's really just all about randomness to make this texture work on the sand. Then I came in with a much lighter marker, and that's just going to bleach that out and create some white spots. And then I came in with a much darker brown, again just creating little dots with that tip there. And then I came in with black. Now you could skip this if you're nervous. I was a little nervous. I'm glad I went for it though. It does make quite a bit of difference to put in that black. It also just makes it a whole lot more realistic looking. If you've ever looked at sand, you'll know that it has very few black specks in it, but it does have some. Now I'm coming in back with that darker shade that I used in the shadows just to darken those up a little bit so they don't get lost. And then I'm blending everything out one last time with that medium shade marker that I put my first base coat down with. And there you can see that great texture you get on the sand. Now I'm going to start coloring in the waves. I used 3 different blues, and I started with the darkest at the top. You could flip this around if you wanted to and use the lightest at the top, and also you could add in some white for some great dimension to these waves. I kept it pretty basic and pretty simple, and I also did the same thing on that second set of waves. I started with the darkest on the top and moved to my lightest, and I had to be careful because these markers do tend to bleed quite easily, especially with the darker colors, so I just kept going very slowly and making sure places were dry before I moved on and added too much ink. Then I wanted to add a little bit of sky, so I used a very light blue and just flick my marker upwards to create some nice stripes in the sky. And then I came in with a very light gray and flicked all the way up to the very top of the paper to kind of spread out that blue and blend it in a little bit. There you can see that finished colored panel ready to go on the card. So after I spent all that time coloring, I didn't want to mess up the sentiment, so I put this back in my Misty, and I'm going to go ahead and use the sentiment "You can tackle anything." That way I can have this as a thank you, I can have it as a Father's Day. It's in my stash ready to go when I need a card. So I'm going to go ahead and line that up just right above the waves there. I wanted to keep it all pretty clean and simple and kind of contained in one space in the card, so I put it very close to my images there, and I just made sure that was straight by looking through the Misty at those grid lines on the lid. And then I'm going to use the Simon Says Stamp black dye ink to stamp this sentiment down with. At first when I got this ink, I really didn't like it, but it seems like the longer it sits on my desk and the older it gets kind of, the better it works, which is weird, but that's what it's doing. And there you can see that nice bold black sentiment I get with that ink now that's a little bit older. So to put this card together, I started with a top folding A2 craft card base. I went ahead and rounded the corners on the top right and bottom left on both the base and the panel there. And then I just put some fun foam on the back of that panel with some double-sided adhesive, and I'll pop that up on the card base. I didn't add any embellishments to this card. I wanted to keep it nice, clean, and simple for a masculine feel. So that completed the card for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this technique and that you'll give it a try. I will leave you with a close-up of this card and just a few pictures. For more information and the supply list, you can head to my blog, craftingwhilecaffeinated.wordpress.com. The link is in the description box below, as well as in the top right hand corner if you click that little I. Thank you guys so much for watching, and happy crafting.